Welcome to today's lesson for 6-2, the non-standard normal. I'm going to warn you in advance, this is a very long example, but I think it's literally everything you could ever be asked, and half of it you probably never will be asked from this section. We still know that it's normally distributed because it says normally distributed, just like it did before, but now it says that the mean is 7. It's not 0 like it was in the last section, so we know we're going to have to do something different. We are still going to draw a bell-shaped curve, again, as we will for most questions in this chapter. But this time, I'll put a 7 in the middle since the mean is 7. The first question actually might be one of the harder ones. You have to figure out that you're shading to the left and you're shading 95%. The 95% probably isn't too bad, but it is to the left. Since you know how much you shaded and you don't know where that mark is, it's an M question. So I'll label it. This time I'm going to label it X. And I'll also label the unshaded region, which is 0.05. So we are going to use an env command, but this time we're going to use norm.m, no S, since it is not standard. And it will still ask for the probability to the left, which is 0.95. This time it asks for 2 additional things. Since it's not the standard normal, it needs to know the mean and it needs to know the standard deviation. And I already calculated all of these. One thing I mentioned before with env questions is to remember your units. In this case, it's seconds. So another bell-shaped curve for part B. This time, the web page is downloaded in less than 3.5 seconds. Now for your picture, the only thing I would generally suggest is that you get the 3.5 on the correct side of the mean. We know 3.5 is less than 7, so it's somewhere over here. As long as you get it to the left, I think you'll be in good shape. And it says less than, so we shade to the left. This one is a dist question because we know where the mark is, but we don't know how much we shaded. We did shade less than or to the left, so we don't need the complement rule or the between rule or anything else. This time, it shouldn't be a big surprise. We're going to use norm.dist. Again, no S, because it's not the standard normal. This time, instead of asking for a Z, it's going to ask for an X, which is 3.5. And it's going to ask for the mean and the standard deviation as well. And it will again ask for cumulative, and you will tell it either true or 1. And we get 0.0401. Part C also gets a picture. This time it's 9 seconds is where the mark is, so that would be to the right of 7. And it says more than, so we shade to the right. This would be a dist question. Now since it's greater than, or because I shaded to the right, I need to use the complement rule. So we have 1 minus norm.dist or 0.1589. Part D is one I don't think we've done before. So when it asks for the middle, it's kind of telling you that it's a between question, but you know that these 2 marks are going to be equidistant since it's in the middle, not lopsided on one place. And you're going to be shading in the middle. So in this case, we're shading 0.95. Now, since we know how much we shaded, but we don't know where the marks are, we're going to need to use the env. And I suggested when you did that to label the unshaded regions and to label the marks. And in this case, that's double the work. We have 2 unshaded regions and 2 marks. Now the marks are pretty easy. You can do this several ways. I will just call mine x sub L and x sub R. Some people call theirs x1 and x2. You pick whichever works for you. Just make sure they're different. For the unshaded regions, if we shaded 95% in the middle, that leaves 5% for the two tails. And the two tails should be the same size, so they should both be 0.025 or half of 5%. And just like we had double the work with the unshaded regions and double the work with the two different marks, we're going to have double the work with our calculations because we have to calculate both XL and XR. Both will use norm.env. Now for XL, this one is pretty straightforward. There is 0.025 to the left. But for XR, you can do this two ways. You can either say the left 0.025 plus the middle 0.95 is 0.975, or you can use the complement rule and say, well, if there's 0.025 to the right, then there must be 1 minus that, or 0.975 to the left. And we get 3.08 seconds and 10.92 seconds. So 95% of the downloads will be in between about 3 and 11 seconds. %10 of the time it will take more than, so we're going to shade to the right. How many seconds? This will be an env question, since we know the probability, we don't know where the mark is. So I'll call this X, and the unshaded region is 0.9. So we have norm.env. The probability to the left is 0.9, comma 7, comma 2. Or 9.56 seconds. The probability it will take between 5 and 9 seconds. So 5 is to the left of 7 and 9 is to the right. And it does use the word between, so we know we're shading in between. This will be a dist question. I know where the marks are. I don't know how much I shaded. So we're going to use the between rule, where we take the probability or the norm dist of the bigger one minus the probability that x is less than the smaller one. Or 0.6827. Now I chose this question for several reasons. Number one, it's a between question. I've got one other one that's kind of a between question, but not exactly. This is a good true between question. But I actually picked these numbers for a particular reason. Notice that 5 is 1 standard deviation to the left of 7, which was the mean, and 9 is 1 standard deviation to the right of the mean. So by the empirical rule, it said we should have gotten 68%. Now, one point of this question is to see that you did not get exactly 68%. So make sure you're actually doing all the work and not just saying, oh, it's 68%, because I want 4 decimal places. But the other thing is to show you that it is in the ballpark, that the empirical rule was a good approximation without having to go to so many decimal places. Now this next question looks like a between question, and you could certainly do it like a between question. And we're going to start it like a between question. So between 3.5 and 7. Now it's fine that 7 is the mean. That is part of the coincidence of this question, but it's not the only coincidence. And it says more than 3.5, but less than 7, so it's in between. And I'm going to write out the between formula for this specific question. And show you why it's not exactly a true between question. The first calculation that we could type into Excel using norm dist is the probability that x is less than 7, but we hopefully agree that this number is going to be 0.5. Since 7 is the mean and it's bell-shaped, half should be below 7 and half should be above 7. And the other coincidental thing about this question is the probability that x is less than 3.5. Back up here in part B, we actually calculated that to be 0.0401. So we did use the between rule in a sense, but we actually never used Excel to solve this question, which is why I said it's kind of iffy. But again, things like that can pop up. Back to Unit 1 vocabulary. It says calculate the 45th percentile. So the 45th percentile, if you remember, is the place or the mark that 45% is below. One thing that I will do differently, I'll still label the unshaded region as 0.55, but instead of labeling the mark as a generic X, I will call it, pardon me, P sub 45, giving it its correct notation. The probability to the left is 0.45. So in other words, 45% of the downloads can be completed in less than 6.75 seconds. Question I will either be the easiest or hardest for you. The probability that it takes exactly 7 seconds, and I just picked 7, it happened to be the mean, it could be any number, exactly 5 or exactly 3. But notice your picture looks like just a mark. There is no shading. It doesn't say more than 7 seconds, at least 7 seconds, exactly 7 seconds. I think the easiest way to look at this question is to ask yourself, how much did you shade? And you should be able to answer that you shaded 0. And that is the answer to this question. If you prefer, you could think about it kind of like a between question. Where you're taking everything less than or equal to 7 and you're subtracting x is less than 7. But we know both of these are the same value. So we know both of these are going to subtract to be 0. So it is very unusual in a continuous distribution to be asked the probability of exactly anything. But if you are in a continuous distribution, at least in a normal distribution, it's always 0. Part J, also taking you back to Unit 1 vocabulary, the third quartile. It would probably be easiest to remember that the third quartile, Q3, is the same thing as the 75th percentile. And we just did a percentile question a moment ago. And again, this time I'll actually label this Q3 instead of X. To the left is 0.75. Or 8.35 seconds. Now part K you could technically do in two different ways, but I wanted to do it one particular way just to make a point that I'll talk about at the end. Fewer than how many seconds would be considered unusual? So unusual is 0.05. Or more than how many seconds would be considered unusual? So we have 0.05 on both the left and the right. And like the question earlier, since we have two marks that we're trying to find, I'll call them XL and XR. And since we have 0.05 on each tail, we have 0.9 in the middle. Both cases we're using norm M. For XL, there's 0.05 to the left. For XR, there's 0.95. And again, you can either add the numbers or use the complement rule. We get 3.71 seconds and 10.29 seconds. And the last question. It will take less than 6 seconds, so 6 would be on the left, and it said less than, so we're going to shade to the left, or more than 10 seconds. So more than 10 will shade to the right of 10. We're back to a dist because I know where the marks are. I don't know how much I shaded. This one is an OR question. It even uses the word OR. So we have X is less than 6 or X is greater than 10. And we talked in the previous section that you're going to use the addition principle. Since they are mutually exclusive. And the first one will be fine, but the second one will require a complement rule. So plus 1 minus or 0.3753. Now just to show you what I meant by I tried to cover everything and why I did part K that particular way. Notice that in K and L, they both shaded to the tails. One is a dist and one is an M. Part J was included because it reminded you of the quartiles. Part I was included because it's the exactly case that again almost never happens. Part H was because you had to think back to the word percentile and what that meant. Parts F and G were both between questions. They used the between rule. Similar to that is part D, which also shaded in the middle, but notice that F and G used dist and D used M. Parts E and C both shaded to the right, but one was dist and one was M. And parts A and B both shaded to the left, one was dist and one was M. So between vocabulary, using dist and M's, and where you shade, I think this question basically covers everything you could ever want to know about non-standard normal questions. As always, if you have questions, please feel free to ask.